There's a guy you've probably never thought about. He doesn't drive anything flashy, he doesn't post about money online, he doesn't have a brand, he doesn't have a following, he's not on any list. He never made the news. He made $28 an hour. That's it. That was the number. No bonuses, no side hustle that blew up, no inheritance, no lucky stock pick that changed everything overnight. Just $28 an hour. A warehouse logistics job in a mid-sized city in Ohio. 40 hours a week. Sometimes a little overtime in winter when the shipments got heavy and the loading bay stayed lit past dark. His name was Marcus, and by the time he turned 51, he had quietly, almost secretly, built a $400,000 investment portfolio. Nobody at work knew. His neighbors had no idea. Even some of his closest friends assumed he was just getting by, like everyone else. And here's the thing that makes this story worth telling. Marcus never felt the need to tell anyone. Not once. Most of us have grown up in a world where money and identity are almost the same thing, where what you earn or what you appear to earn says something about who you are, where the car on the driveway is a message, where the holiday photos are a signal, where the watch on your wrist is a sentence that other people read before you even open your mouth. Marcus never bought into that, and it cost him almost nothing extra to opt out. That's the part people don't expect, because when you look at his actual numbers, the salary, the timeline, the outcome, the math isn't magic. It's almost uncomfortable in how simple it is. But simple and easy are two completely different things, because what Marcus did wasn't really about money at all. It was about something much harder to define, something most financial content never actually touches. It was about what he chose not to want. And that's a psychological muscle most of us were never trained to build. There's a moment, and almost everyone has it, where you get a raise or a bonus or just a little extra breathing room, and almost immediately something expands to fill it. A nicer apartment, a newer car, a subscription you didn't have before, a habit that costs just a little more than the last one, and then another and another. Economists call it lifestyle creep. Marcus just called it the trap. He watched it happen to people around him his entire working life. Good people, hard workers, people who earned significantly more than him and somehow always had less, always stretched, always one bad month away from a conversation they didn't want to have. He decided early, almost too early to fully understand why, that he wasn't going to play that game. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a vision board. He didn't tell his mates down the pub that he'd figured something out. He just quietly started making different choices. Small ones, consistent ones, the kind that don't show up on anyone's radar. And if you've ever stared at your bank account at the end of the month, confused, a little defeated, wondering where it all went, even though you work hard, even though you're not reckless with money, even though you feel like you're trying, then Marcus's story might be one of the most valuable things you hear this year. If this is the kind of story that makes you think, go ahead and like the video. It helps more than you know, and it tells us you want more of this. Marcus grew up in a house where money was never discussed directly. It was felt, in the silence after bills arrived, in the way his mother paused before saying yes to things, in the way his father worked weekends without being asked, not for extras, just for stability. He didn't grow up poor exactly, but he grew up aware. Aware that money had edges, that it could run out, that the gap between fine and not fine was narrower than most people wanted to admit. By the time he was 22, he had his job at the warehouse. Decent hours, union benefits, a small apartment 20 minutes from work. Nothing remarkable about any of it from the outside, but something had already shifted inside him. He'd watched the colleague, a guy named Darnell, good worker, funny, someone everyone liked, finance a brand new truck the week he got promoted. Beautiful thing. Everyone talked about it for days. Darnell looked proud. He deserved to feel proud. But Marcus did the quiet math in his head. The repayments, the insurance jump, the maintenance, the years it would take to clear. He didn't judge Darnell, not even slightly, but he felt something click inside him, like a door closing gently on a version of himself that could have gone that route. He opened his first brokerage account at 24. He put in $150 that month, not because $150 was going to change anything immediately, he knew that, but because starting felt more important than the amount, because waiting until he had more money to invest is exactly what most people do, and most people never actually start. The market dropped 2 months later. His $150 became $119. He didn't panic. He didn't check it every day. He just added another $150 the following month and went back to work. That was the pattern, month after month, year after year. Not exciting, not dramatic, just consistent in a way that most people genuinely underestimate, because consistency without visible reward is one of the hardest psychological games there is. His friends were buying things. Good things, understandable things. Holidays, furniture, newer phones, bigger TVs, a house in the suburbs with a garden they'd wanted for years. Marcus was happy for them, genuinely. He just didn't feel the pull the same way. And that's not a character flaw in his friends. That's just how the system is built. Every advertisement, every social feed, every shop window is designed, carefully designed, to make you feel like the next thing will complete something in you that currently feels unfinished. Marcus had somehow developed an immunity to that feeling. Or maybe not immunity, maybe just awareness. The ability to notice the feeling, name it for what it was, and let it pass without acting on it. That's a different skill entirely, and most people don't realize it's even a skill. By 35, his portfolio had crossed $100,000. He told nobody. He went to work the next morning, clocked in at the same time he always did, ate the same lunch he'd packed the night before, and drove home in the same car he'd owned for 6 years. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, something had quietly compounded into a kind of freedom that most people spend their whole lives chasing, without ever quite knowing what they're actually chasing. By the time Marcus hit his mid-40s, something interesting started happening. Not with the money, with the people around him. A friend, someone he'd known since his 20s, started talking about retirement, about how impossible it felt, about how the numbers never seemed to work, about how he'd done everything right, earned decent money his whole career, and still couldn't see a clear path forward. Marcus listened. He didn't say much. And that was the hardest part. Not the investing, not the patience, not the years of quiet consistency while everyone around him spent freely and lived visibly. The hardest part was the silence. Because Marcus wasn't secretive out of arrogance. He wasn't quiet because he thought he was better. He was quiet because he'd seen what money conversations do to people, how they shift dynamics, how they create distance, how the moment someone knows your number, they stop seeing you the same way. He'd watched it happen to others, so he kept the door closed. At 51, he sat down one evening with a cup of tea and opened his investment app. Not anxiously, not obsessively, just to look. The way you might glance at something you planted a long time ago, curious how tall it had grown. $400,000 and change. He sat with that number for a while. He didn't celebrate, didn't call anyone, didn't post anything. He just sat in his kitchen in the same flat he'd lived in for 11 years, with the same secondhand table he'd never bothered replacing, and felt something he struggled to name. It wasn't pride exactly. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter than both of those things. It was the feeling of having made a decision a long time ago, a small, unglamorous, deeply unsexy decision, and having that decision slowly, invisibly, build something real. No one threw a party for Marcus. No one knew to. And he was completely fine with that. Because here's what Marcus understood that most financial content misses entirely. Wealth isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like what we've been shown it looks like. Sometimes it's a man in a modest flat, drinking tea, looking at a number on a screen, feeling a quiet kind of okay that money alone can't buy, but that a certain relationship with money can slowly build over decades if you let it. The average person will earn over $1 million in their lifetime. Most of it will pass through their hands without leaving much trace. Marcus earned less than most and kept more than almost anyone he knew. Not because he was extraordinary, not because he had access to secret information, not because he sacrificed joy or lived a small, joyless life in service of a spreadsheet, but because he got very clear very early on what he actually needed versus what he'd been told to want. And that gap between what you need and what you're told to want, that gap is where most people's wealth quietly disappears, every single month, without them ever really noticing. If Marcus's story hit different, sit with that for a second. Because it was never really about the $400,000. It was about the gap between what you actually need and what the world tells you to want. Most of us are living somewhere inside that gap right now. If this made you think, like the video, it helps more than you know. Share it with someone who's working hard and wondering where it all goes. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real ones. No gurus, no noise. We'll see you in the next one.